Thank you so much for that introduction. Those of us who follow us and support us at Qiao may know me as one of the translators. Qiao Collective and I personally are very honored to speak today in such distinguished company. In the past few months, the Asian diaspora around the world, but particularly in the West, have been experiencing increased hostility. Due to talk of the Wuhan virus or Kung flu pushed by some, many have come to face scrutiny, alienation, and even violence. A 39-year-old woman in Brooklyn is doused in chemical acid while taking out the trash. An Asian American family, including 2 toddlers, are stabbed while shopping in a Texas supermarket. And a 60-year-old Chinese man died of cardiac arrest in Sydney, Australia, because bystanders, presuming he was infected with COVID-19, refused to administer CPR. As a collective of Chinese diaspora activists, Qiao Collective has striven to place the interpersonal hate and xenophobia we witness in our daily lives into a larger structural context. We see domestic racism and international imperialism as 2 sides of the same coin. We reject claims to imperial citizenship, multicultural belonging, and safety through policing as means to oppose anti-Asian hate violence in the time of COVID-19. Instead, this violence must be cut off at its source by ending the principal contradiction of US imperialism as it coheres around the so-called China threat. Recent American escalation against China may seem abrupt, but not when put into context. Obama's pivot to Asia, while ostensibly made in the spirit of partnership, quietly shifted 60% of US naval and air capacity to the Asia Pacific. Trump merely builds on that, marking China as the Pentagon's #1 priority, warning of a coming clash of civilizations, and just this month declaring the CPC's guiding ideology of Marxism-Leninism as antithetical to American values. This bipartisan support for being tough on China actually finds its roots in the American imperial project. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the United States has waged war around the world unopposed. China, too, often found itself the victim of imperialist aggression, including the infamous 1999 bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, and the 1993 Yinghe incident, in which a Chinese container ship was forced by the United States to strand at sea for 24 days. Bush Jr.'s engagement anticipated the political liberalization of China, or the eroding power of the CPC, and its elimination as an impediment to the US's own interests. China has instead refused to submit to imperial pressure. Moreover, it has a growing capacity to support so-called rogue states against American unilateralism, effected through aggressive hybrid warfare. This has now led the United States to confront China in a desperate bid to preserve its hegemony. As anti-imperialists, socialists, and peace activists, we must be prepared to meet this challenge head-on. Ultimately, we must understand that imperialism is a being of many faces. The hostility experienced by the Asian diaspora in the West, the centuries-long program of dispossession and genocide of indigenous peoples, refusal to address deep-rooted grief over racialized and militarized policing, and continuing warfare and famine in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. These are all branches of the same root, sick and shattered societies birthed from the contradictions of imperialism. The new Cold War agenda is dangerous and must be thoroughly understood. Instead of approaching the crisis of COVID in the spirit of science and cooperation, the United States and its allies have cynically chosen to continue inhumane sanctions on Iran, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Lebanon, and Venezuela, among many others, starving their citizens of much-needed medical supplies. While in the United States, 148,000 lives have been lost to COVID, disproportionately in indigenous, Black, and immigrant communities. Yet the US is not funding pandemic response, but instead dedicating $20 billion towards regaining the advantage in the Asia Pacific. This not only deprives the American poor of much needed resources, but redirects them to the equally criminal occupation of Ryukyu, Guam, and Hawaii in the name of containing China. Meanwhile, China has proven itself a responsible and accountable actor in the face of global challenges such as COVID, climate catastrophe, and the struggle against poverty. It has conceived of, and practices the foreign policy doctrine of a shared future for humankind. Since the onset of COVID, China has sent billions of tons of medical aid, indiscriminate of ideology or alliance, committed to increased funding of the World Health Organization, and has declared that the Chinese vaccine would be a public good, prioritized for global South nations. Crisscrossing the world at great risk to themselves, Chinese and Cuban medical brigades embody socialist internationalism, understanding that human solidarity is required for today's increasingly complex problems. Some Western leftists misperceive these diametrically opposed records and think US aggression on China as simply an inter-imperial rivalry. False equivalences between the US and China only obscure the roots of this coming conflict, the desire for the maintenance of US hegemony at any cost. Sitting on the sidelines takes the side of the status quo, that of preserving violent imperialism over the global South. Amidst the highly propagandized Western left, Qiao Collective sees part of our role as a bridge towards the Chinese left. Highlighting the nature of China's socialist project, its vision of win-win cooperation, and the lasting, vital legacy of the Chinese Revolution and its principles of people's democracy, internationalism, and anti-colonialism. The United States has identified these very principles as an unacceptable threat to its own bloody hegemony. It's up to us in the imperial core to challenge, oppose, and dismantle every imperialist roadblock to a world of peace, cooperation, multilateralism, and shared development. Thank you so much.